My name is Vivian Hawthorne. I was 22 years old when I walked out of the house that never felt like a home, carrying nothing but a worn duffel bag and the quiet rage of a daughter forgotten. I worked 2 part-time jobs, a bookstore clerk by morning and a diner waitress by night while building my handmade jewelry business after midnight. For my family, though, I was nothing more than the girl who couldn't figure out her life. They called me a dreamer, as if it were an insult. But I wasn't just dreaming. I was planning my escape. And at 4:11 a.m. on a silent Tuesday, I disappeared not as a goodbye, but as the first sentence in the life I would write for myself. I didn't become invisible overnight. In the Hawthorne house, disappearance was a slow erosion. My father's words were chisels carving away my spirit, my mother's silences, the acid rain that wore down anything left standing. By 14, I knew the rules that governed our universe, unspoken commandments carved into bone and blood rules that dictated who was worthy of love and who would always stand outside in the cold. Rule number 1. When Rowan failed, everyone else bore the blame. I remember that afternoon so clearly it might as well be burned onto the back of my eyelids. Rowan, with his reckless grin and entitlement polished into a weapon, had stolen Dad's BMW and crashed it into the Hendersons' mailbox. I was upstairs dissecting Shakespeare's metaphors for English class, the pages trembling slightly in my hands as the shouting began. But when Dad came storming into the house, rage thick around him like a thundercloud, he didn't yell at Rowan. No, his eyes found me storm gray and sharp enough to cut flesh from bone, and he spat. "Why didn't you stop him? You knew, didn't you? I tasted metal." Then the taste of truth cutting my tongue. Innocence was useless here. In this house, I existed to absorb impact, to be the lightning rod that grounded Rowan's storms. Rule number 2. Appearance was worth more than truth. I remember coming home one evening, eyes gritty from a 12-hour double shift and brain buzzing with exhaustion, clutching my final exam results, an A in business statistics. I thought just for a moment that maybe they'd see me. That maybe Mom would be proud. Instead, I walked into the living room to find her beaming at Rowan, gushing about his bail in accounting. It was such a hard class for him, she crooned, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. I stood there invisible in the doorway, my A burning a hole through my fingertips. Later that night, I tucked my printed grade report into my journal like a secret trophy, something sacred no one else would ever see. It felt like burying a small piece of myself. Rule number 3. Love was conditional, and I hadn't met the conditions. Rowan could scream at Dad, slam doors, fail classes, and still be forgiven before dinner. I, on the other hand, was expected to smile through disappointment, to nod politely as my dreams were dismissed, like lint brushed off a suit jacket. I remember sitting across from Dad at breakfast, gathering the courage to tell him I wanted to start a jewelry brand. I'd stayed up every night sketching designs, running calculations, teaching myself online about margins and supplier contracts. My voice shook as I said it, but there was hope. In my chest, trembling, fragile hope. He peered at me over the rim of his reading glasses, scoffed, and said, "Still playing pretend with beads and books, Viv." My heart cracked, but before I could gather the shards, Rowan strolled in, announcing he'd been named to the dean's list. Conversation over. Just like that. By 22, these rules weren't just family law, they were theology. Survival scripture etched into my marrow. I learned to fold myself small enough to fit into their idea of me, the background daughter, the placeholder, the shadow that clapped for the sun. I perfected the art of invisibility, wearing obedience like armor. But beneath that quiet compliance, anger brewed. Hot, silent, volcanic. It pooled in the hollow of my chest, rising closer to the surface with every Sunday dinner tasting like blood in my mouth as I forced a smile. That final Sunday, everything changed. The dining room smelled of roasted chicken and rosemary laughter rising in bright bubbles from Rowan's end of the table as he unwrapped a set of car keys to a brand new Camry. I watched the silver glint of the keyring catch the chandelier light, dazzling and cold. My heart beat a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs as Dad turned to me, eyes bored and sharp, and said, "Rent's going up to $800 a month. You're an adult now, Vivian. Time you contributed properly." His words cut through the laughter like a scalpel, slicing something final and irreparable in me. In that moment, the rules cracked. For the first time, I saw them not as immutable curses, but as choices. Their choices, not mine. My pulse roared in my ears, drowning out Rowan's smug grin and Mom's careful silence. Rage rose in me, then molten and pure, but so did something else, something clearer, colder, stronger than rage. Clarity. And in that crack of clarity, light leaked in, enough to reveal a path, a way out. Not with screams or shattered plates, not with bitter monologues or final confrontations that would be twisted into more reasons to hate me. No, I would leave the way. Shadows leave at dawn, silently, completely, never to return. I rose from the table without a word, leaving my half-finished dinner cooling in the porcelain bowl. In my room, I packed quickly a few clothes, my journal, my laptop, the essentials of survival. I didn't say goodbye. There was no one to say it to. As I stepped out into the cold dawn hours, the world smelled of rain and exhaust, of freedom and finality. I carried nothing but a duffel bag and 22 years of suppressed rage transformed into resolve. And as I walked down the cracked sidewalk away from the Hawthorne house, I felt it for the first time, not hope, not yet, but something close. The quiet knowledge that beyond the edge of their kingdom, there was a place where I could be seen, where I could build something of my own, where I could become someone other than the girl who absorbed impact. I didn't look back. I never would. I didn't become invisible overnight. In the Hawthorne house, disappearance was a slow erosion. My father's words were chisels carving away my spirit, my mother's silences, the acid rain that wore down anything left standing. By 14, I knew the rules that governed our universe, unspoken commandments carved into bone and blood, rules that dictated who was worthy of love and who would always stand outside in the cold. Rule number 1. When Rowan failed, everyone else bore the blame. I remember that afternoon so clearly it might as well be burned onto the back of my eyelids. Rowan, with his reckless grin and entitlement polished into a weapon, had stolen Dad's BMW and crashed it into the Hendersons' mailbox. I was upstairs dissecting Shakespeare's metaphors for English class, the pages trembling slightly in my hands as the shouting began. But when Dad came storming into the house, rage thick around him like a thundercloud, he didn't yell at Rowan. No, his eyes found me storm gray and sharp enough to cut flesh from bone, and he spat. "Why didn't you stop him? You knew, didn't you? I tasted metal." Then the taste of truth cutting my tongue. Innocence was useless here. In this house, I existed to absorb impact, to be the lightning rod that grounded Rowan's storms. Rule number 2. Appearance was worth more than truth. I remember coming home one evening, eyes gritty from a 12-hour double shift and brain buzzing with exhaustion, clutching my final exam results in A in business statistics. I thought just for a moment that maybe they'd see me, that maybe Mom would be proud. Instead, I walked into the living room to find her beaming at Rowan, gushing about his B in accounting. It was such a hard class for him, she crooned, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. I stood there invisible in the doorway, my A burning a hole through my fingertips. Later that night, I tucked my printed grade report into my journal like a secret trophy, something sacred no one else would ever see. It felt like burying a small piece of myself. Rule number 3. Love was conditional, and I hadn't met the conditions. Rowan could scream at Dad's slam doors, fail classes, and still be forgiven before dinner. I, on the other hand, was expected to smile through disappointment, to nod politely as my dreams were dismissed, like lint brushed off a suit jacket. I remember sitting across from Dad at breakfast, gathering the courage to tell him I wanted to start a jewelry brand. I'd stayed up every night sketching designs, running calculations, teaching myself online about margins and supplier contracts. My voice shook as I said it, but there was hope in my chest, trembling, fragile hope. He peered at me over the rim of his reading glasses, scoffed, and said, "Still playing pretend with beads and books, Viv." My heart cracked, but before I could gather the shards, Rowan strolled in announcing he'd been named to the dean's list. Conversation over, just like that. By 22, these rules weren't just family law. They were theology, survival scripture etched into my marrow. I learned to fold myself small enough to fit into their idea of me, the background daughter, the placeholder, the shadow that clapped for the sun. I perfected the art of invisibility, wearing obedience like armor. But beneath that quiet compliance, anger brewed. Hot, silent, volcanic. It pooled in the hollow of my chest, rising closer to the surface with every Sunday dinner tasting like blood in my mouth as I forced a smile. That final Sunday, everything changed. The dining room smelled of roasted chicken and rosemary, laughter rising in bright bubbles from Rowan's end of the table as he unwrapped a set of car keys to a brand new Camry. I watched the silver glint of the key ring catch the chandelier light, dazzling and cold. My heart beat a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs as Dad turned to me, eyes bored and sharp, and said, "Rent's going up to $800 a month. You're an adult now, Vivian. Time you contributed properly." His words cut through the laughter like a scalpel, slicing something final and irreparable in me. In that moment, the rules cracked. For the first time, I saw them not as immutable curses, but as choices. Their choices, not mine. My pulse roared in my ears, drowning out Rowan's smug grin and Mom's careful silence. Rage rose in me, then molten and pure, but so did something else. Something clearer, colder, stronger than rage, clarity. And in that crack of clarity, light leaked in, enough to reveal a path. A way out, not with screams or shattered plates, not with bitter monologues or final confrontations that would be twisted into more reasons to hate me. No, I would leave the way shadows leave at dawn, silently, completely, never to return. I rose from the table without a word, leaving my half-finished dinner cooling in the porcelain bowl. In my room, I packed quickly a few clothes. My journal, my laptop, the essentials of survival. I didn't say goodbye. There was no one to say it to. As I stepped out into the cold dawn hours, the world smelled of rain and exhaust, of freedom and finality. I carried nothing but a duffel bag and 22 years of suppressed rage transformed into resolve. And as I walked down the cracked sidewalk away from the Hawthorne house, I felt it for the first time, not hope, not yet, but something close. The quiet knowledge that beyond the edge of their kingdom, there was a place where I could be seen, where I could build something of my own, where I could become someone other than the girl who absorbed impact. I didn't look back. I never would. I woke to the rattling hum of the Greyhound bus and the thin light of dawn breaking over a horizon I didn't recognize. My head pressed against the window, leaving a faint smear of oil from my hair. I didn't care. The glass was cold against my skin, grounding me in a way I desperately needed. Around me, other passengers stirred. An old man with nicotine-stained fingers coughed into his wrinkled coat. A young woman cradled a crying baby to her chest, whispering lullabies in Spanish. Everyone here was running from something or toward something. I was both. I reached down and curled my fingers around my duffel bag at my feet. It was all I had left of the life I was abandoning, and all I needed for the life I was about to build. Inside were my grandmother's journals. I could almost hear her voice, that clipped, resolute tone no one ever dared question. "Don't let them make you small, Vivian. Hawthorne women are carved from iron, not porcelain. Outside, the sun rose fully, setting fields ablaze with gold. Each mile that passed widened the space between me and the house with its pink walls, silent dinners, and unspoken resentments." I thought about Dad sitting at the kitchen table, finding my letter. about Mom's trembling hands as she read the ledger of truths I'd left behind, about Rowan still asleep in his expensive sheets, never realizing the only thing keeping his life pristine was my silence. But I refused to let their shadows seep into this morning. Today wasn't theirs to ruin. Today was mine. At the next rest stop, I stepped off the bus and felt the chill morning air bite my cheeks. For the first time in years, I inhaled without bracing for criticism. I tasted freedom in the cold wind. My phone buzzed in my pocket, missed calls, voicemails, desperate texts. I turned it off without reading a single word. Because the truth was simple. I didn't need their permission to exist. I didn't need their approval to breathe. And for the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't just running away from them. I was running towards myself. The bus rattled over cracked asphalt, rocking me in a rhythm that should have been soothing. But my pulse thrummed too loud in my ears for sleep to find me again. I rested my forehead against the window, watching dawn bleed across the endless fields. Fog hovered low over the grass, hiding the dirt and weeds beneath it, like my family beautiful from a distance, rotten underneath. I closed my eyes and felt tears threaten, but I swallowed them back down. No more crying over people who never cared if I drowned in my own grief. In the reflection of the glass, I barely recognized myself. Pale-skin hair scraped into a trembling bun, dark eyes ringed with exhaustion and resolve. For a moment, I mourned her, the girl who stayed, who smiled politely, who paid her family in obedience and silence. But she was gone now, dissolved into this new version of me, forged in a kitchen at 4 a.m. with nothing but rage and a duffel bag. My fingers curled around the strap of that bag. Inside were the only things that mattered: my laptop, my grandmother's journals, the jewelry box with the broken clasp. They felt heavier than gold, heavier than any car keys my brother ever held, heavier than the house I'd been forced to pay rent in just to exist under their roof. A sliver of sunlight broke over the horizon, piercing the window and warming my numb cheek. In that moment, I made myself a promise, a vow carved from bone and betrayal. I would never let them decide my worth again. I would never sit silent at a table that served me shame as dinner. I would build a life so far beyond their comprehension that they would choke on their disbelief. And if they ever saw me again, they wouldn't recognize the girl they'd ignored. They would see the woman they'd created in their cruelty, unbreakable, unapologetic, unstoppable. The bus rolled on into the waking day, carrying me toward the reckoning I was destined to become. When the bus finally wheezed to a stop 12 hours later, my knees cracked like old wood as I stood. My body ached with the brittle exhaustion of someone carrying more than luggage. I slung my duffel bag over my shoulder, its strap biting into skin rubbed raw by hours of friction, and stepped out into a town I hadn't seen since childhood summers spent chasing fireflies and believing the world was kind. The air hit me first cool and thick with the scent of rain-soaked pavement, lilacs blooming wild in sidewalk cracks, and distant exhaust fumes curling from the main road. Freedom tasted like damp petals mixed with grit. I stood there for a moment, knees trembling, lungs burning with each ragged inhale, as I tried to remember who I was before survival became my only identity. Then I saw her. Helena Morrison stood under the faded Greyhound sign, its peeling paint flaking onto her polished black shoes. Her silver hair was pulled into a severe bun, wire-rimmed glasses perched low on her sharp nose. She wore a dark green coat. Despite the warm breeze, her posture straight and unmoving like a general awaiting a prisoner transfer. But it was her eyes that pinned me to the concrete. Before I even reached her eyes, gray as a winter sea, ancient with knowledge unblinking in their assessment. Vivian Hawthorne, she set her voice low, gravelly, and powerful enough to crack stone. You look like hell. A broken laugh slipped from my throat, rough with exhaustion and relief. Hello, Helena. My voice cracked on her name. I'm sorry to show up like this. No, you're not, she replied without blinking. And you shouldn't be. Her gaze flicked to the duffel bag hanging across my chest like a shield. That all you brought? I nodded, shame, burning hot behind my eyes, threatening tears I didn't want to spill. But Helena just clicked her tongue in annoyance, her lips curling into the closest thing she ever gave to a smile. Good, she said firmly. Less to weigh you down. Come on. She turned without another word, and I followed, stumbling slightly under the weight of my rage, grief and relief mixing into something dizzying. Her car smelled of cracked black leather peppermint candies melted into the cup holder and lavender soap that clung to her skin. We drove in silence. I watched the twilight roll past the window, the sky a bruised purple fading into indigo. Streetlights blinked awake one by one, illuminating empty sidewalks and shuttered shops. Helena didn't speak. Her hands gripped the wheel with soldier-like precision, each turn executed with quiet authority. Only when we pulled into her driveway, a narrow gravel path leading to a sprawling craftsman cottage draped in ivy and stubborn late-blooming roses, did she finally turn to me. You can stay here as long as you need, she said, her voice softer, but still threaded with steel. But there's one rule. I clutched my duffel bag tighter, my heart rattling like a trapped bird. What is it? She looked at me, then really looked at me, and I felt her gaze reach inside and catalog every fractured bone in my spirit, every bleeding wound my family left behind, every scream I'd swallowed until it rotted into silence. No hiding, she said, her words slicing through the darkness in my chest. You left that prison to start living. Don't waste it by disappearing again. Tears slid hot and silent down my cheeks, carving clean lines through the road dust and sweat caked on my skin. Helena reached out her thumb, rough but gentle, as she brushed them away, leaving smudges of salt on my cheekbones. Your grandmother would be proud. You know, she murmured so quietly, I almost thought I imagined it. She always said you were the only Hawthorne with any damn backbone. Something inside me cracked open, then not like glass shattering on tile, but like a caged bird, realizing the door had been left ajar all along. The ache in my chest loosened just enough to let in her words, just enough to let in the possibility that maybe I wasn't as broken as they made me believe. Thank you, I whispered, my voice trembling like a sapling in a storm. Helena squeezed my hand once, her grip strong and grounding, before letting go and stepping out of the car. The setting sun caught in her hair, turning silver strands to threads of molten gold as she glanced back at me. Come inside, Vivian, she commanded gently. There's tea waiting, and tomorrow we start figuring out how to take back everything they stole from you. I followed her up the worn brick path, past rose bushes blooming despite their neglect, past wind chimes that whispered secrets in the breeze, past a porch that smelled of cedarwood and memories. Her house glowed warm and golden in the dusk windows, spilling light onto the darkening world like silent promises. Inside, bookshelves sagged under the weight of knowledge and rebellion. Teacups clinked softly in the kitchen, and the air hummed with lavender oil, and something I hadn't felt in years: safety. As Helena shut the door behind me, sealing out the cold night air, I realized for the first time in my life I wasn't alone anymore. I had an ally. And this was only the beginning. That night, Helena gave me her guest room. It smelled of lavender and old wood, with lace curtains billowing like pale ghosts in the breeze. I lay awake long after midnight, listening to the whisper of oak trees outside, wondering what my mother was thinking at that exact moment. Was she crying into her designer pillows, or was she sipping her evening wine, blaming me for her shattered illusions? I woke to the smell of coffee so strong it punched through my exhaustion. Helena sat at the kitchen table, her glasses perched on the tip of her nose as she flipped through a leather-bound journal. Without looking up, she pointed to the chair across from her. Sit, eat, read. I obeyed. A slice of buttered toast appeared in front of me next to a thick journal embossed with gold initials, E.H., my grandmother's. I whispered. Helena nodded her jaw tight. Your grandmother was smarter than any of them realized. She kept records, letters, bank statements, legal documents. All of it's in here. My hand shook as I flipped through the pages. Neat, sloping handwriting, every line deliberate. Newspaper clippings tucked between journal entries, copies of checks and property deeds. Names highlighted, transactions underlined in angry red ink. Why would she keep all this? I asked, my voice trembling. Helena looked up, her eyes flint hard. Because she didn't trust your father. Evelyn told me once, Dean is the kind of man who thinks love is ownership. She knew what he was capable of. She just never imagined he'd do it to you. A tear slipped down my cheek as I read a letter addressed to me written the year before she died. My dearest Vivian, if you're reading this, it means Dean has tried to take what is yours. Remember, the Hawthorne name is not his alone. You are my legacy. Fight for what belongs to you. Fight without mercy. My breath came out in ragged gasps. The pages blurred as I read the trust document dated 3 years ago, naming me as sole beneficiary to her estate property investment accounts and a business portfolio I never knew existed. A fortune large enough to pay for my education 10 times over, buy a house outright, and fund a future I hadn't dared dream of. But it had never reached me. Helena, how did he? She slammed the journal shut, her expression thunderous. Your father forged documents, manipulated power of attorney when you were hospitalized that year. He stole your inheritance and funneled it to Rowan's tuition and his own businesses. I choked back a sob. Every sleepless night working 2 jobs, every moment of guilt for being lazy and irresponsible, every dinner where I was told Rowan was the success story while I was still figuring it out, all of it built on lies. What do I do now? I whispered. Helena reached across the table and gripped my wrist with surprising strength. Her blue eyes burned with quiet fury. You fight, she said simply. I know a lawyer who specializes in trust fraud, Archer Delaney. He's ruthless, expensive, and worth every damn penny. He'll help you take it back. Take it back. I repeated the words, tasting like blood and steel on my tongue. Yes. Helena leaned closer, her voice dropping to a low growl. Your father thinks he's won. He thinks you're weak, invisible. But he's wrong. You are your grandmother's granddaughter, and now you have me. I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply. The smell of burnt toast, strong coffee, old wood, safety. When I opened them again, the scared, quiet girl who once apologized for existing was gone. In her place sat Vivian Hawthorne, the girl who would burn down her family's kingdom to reclaim what was stolen. And I would start today. I dialed the number Helena gave me with trembling fingers. Each digit felt like loading a bullet into a chamber. The ringtone pulsed in my ear, an ominous countdown to war. I wasn't sure I was ready to fight. On the 3rd ring, a deep, calm voice answered a voice honed on precision, measured in steel and quiet storms. Archer Delaney speaking. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My throat closed around the words, choking on glass and memories. But then I forced them out, each syllable scraping bloody on the way up. My name is Vivian Hawthorne. Helena Morrison told me to call. I think my father stole my inheritance. Silence hummed through the line, low and electric, like the moment before lightning splits the sky. Tell me everything, he said simply. So I did. I told him about the Hawthorne house that smelled of rosemary chicken and poison, about my grandmother's journals hidden behind loose bricks, about the trust fund meant for my education, my freedom, my life siphoned away by the man who taught me to measure worth in obedience. My voice broke and steadied and broke again as 22 years of silence poured out, flooding every crevice I had sealed to survive. I spoke of Sunday dinners where love was measured in rent money and humiliation was served with dessert. When I finished, my hands were shaking so violently I had to press the phone against my cheek to keep it from slipping. "I see," Archer said, finally. His voice was cool, analytical, slicing clean through my shame with surgical precision. "This is not uncommon. Financial abuse by parents is one of the least prosecuted forms of theft, but it is theft nonetheless." Tears burned behind my eyes. No one had ever called it that before. Not family drama, not a private matter, theft, a crime with a victim, a crime with consequences. What do I do now?" I whispered, tasting salt and steel on my tongue. "You fight back," he said firmly. The words landed with the weight of iron. "I will need copies of every document Helena mentioned, the journals, the trust paperwork, any bank statements you can find. Once I review them, we will file for immediate freezing of your father's access to the trust until an investigation is complete." "Freeze his access," I repeated, rolling the words around in my mouth like a sip of scalding coffee on a winter morning. Bitter, hot, real, powerful. "Yes," Archer continued, unflinching. "He will no longer be able to spend your money as his own. And when the court rules in your favor, we will recover damages and restitution for the fraud." I closed my eyes, and for the first time I let myself imagine it, his face when the notice arrived. The arrogance curling into fury. The empire he built on my silence beginning to crack under his feet. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "He's going to hate me," I said quietly, the words falling like coins into a deep well. "Let him hate you," Archer replied, and this time his voice sharpened cold enough to cauterize wounds. "Hate is powerless against truth. You are not a scared girl anymore, Miss Hawthorne. You are an heir fighting for what is rightfully yours. He should be the one afraid." Something shifted inside me then, like a heavy rusted chain snapping free in my chest. I inhaled deeply, tasting air that didn't belong to him. "Okay," I breathed. The word tasted new. "Clean." "What happens next? I'll draft the preliminary motions this afternoon," he said. "You will come to my office tomorrow morning to sign them. Wear something that makes you feel powerful." I almost laughed at that. My wardrobe was thrifted t-shirts and jeans thin with age. But tomorrow I would dress like the woman I was becoming, the woman my grandmother knew I could be, the woman who would watch her father's kingdom burn and not flinch at the heat. "Thank you, Mr. Delaney," I said, my voice firmer now, solid as earth. "Call me Archer." He replied, a hint of something warmer beneath the steel. "We're about to go to war together. Formalities are wasted on the battlefield." When I hung up, Helena was standing by the kitchen window, the late morning light haloing her silver hair, her eyes sharp and knowing. "Well," she asked, voice calm as ever. I exhaled long and slow, feeling the first true calm in years settle into my bones like warm rain soaking parched earth. "He's going to help me fight," I said simply. Helena nodded, once her eyes gleaming with something fierce and unbreakable. "Good," she said, "because it's about damn time the Hawthorns learned what happens when they underestimate the girl they tried to erase." And in that quiet kitchen, surrounded by lavender soap and old books, I realized for the first time in my life, I wasn't alone anymore. I had an ally, I had a plan, and this was only the beginning. I walked into Archer Delaney's office at 9:02 a.m., wearing the only outfit I owned that made me feel invincible. Black jeans, a fitted blazer borrowed from Helena, and my grandmother's silver pendant resting against my collarbone like a shield. The receptionist greeted me with a polite nod and gestured down a long hallway lined with glass-walled offices. Archer's door was open. He stood when I entered, tall and composed in a charcoal suit, his eyes the color of worn steel calm, calculating, unbreakable. "Vivian," he said, gesturing to the seat across from his sleek mahogany desk. "You're on time." "That's good," It shows discipline. I've been waiting 22 years for this moment, I said, sinking into the leather chair. I wasn't going to be late. A faint smile touched his lips before vanishing like smoke. He pushed a thick folder towards me. Legal language, signatures, power, revenge wrapped in parchment and ink. These are the preliminary motions to freeze your father's access to the trust, he explained, tapping each page with elegant fingers. This document will strip him of the authority he's abused since you were a teenager. This one initiates a forensic financial investigation into all his transactions involving your name. And this, he paused, locking eyes with me. This is the formal complaint for financial abuse and inheritance fraud. The first strike. My chest tightened. My pulse thrummed in my throat like war drums. I picked up the pen he slid across the desk. It felt heavy in my hand, like a weapon forged for me alone. I want to read every line I said. Good, Archer replied softly. Never sign anything without reading it. That's how predators like him win. So I read. Every page, every clause, every term that declared in black and white that I was no longer the quiet daughter they could ignore, but an adversary with the law at her back. When I finished, my signature flowed steady and sharp across each line. Vivian Rose Hawthorne. No hesitation, no fear. When I set the pen down, Archer nodded with approval. It begins today, he said. Once these are filed, your father will be served within 48 hours. Expect calls, threats, manipulation. I smiled, and it surprised us both. Let him try, I said. He can't reach me where I am now. Archer leaned back, studying me with a strategist's eye. For a moment, his professional detachment softened. You remind me of my sister, he said quietly. She fought her father too. Different circumstances, same darkness. It almost broke her. What happened to her? I asked. She won, he replied simply. And then she built something beautiful out of what he tried to destroy. His words settled into my bones like prophecy. I stood gathering my bag, my folder, my armor. Thank you, Archer, I said, meeting his gaze steadily. For believing me. Don't thank me yet, he said, his eyes flashing with cold promise. Thank me when he's on his knees. As I stepped out into the crisp morning air, sunlight spilled across the city skyline, golden and sharp. I felt it then, like an electric pulse through every cell. This was just the beginning. I stood in the marble hallway of the county courthouse hills, echoing like gunshots with every step. Today was the hearing. Today, Dean Hawthorne, the man who raised me on silence and fear, would stand before the law, stripped of his curated dignity. When I entered the courtroom, he was already there, seated beside his attorney. He wore a dark suit that hung loose on his frame, gray hair neatly combed, but the arrogance remained in the tight set of his jaw. Our eyes locked for half a second. His flickered with rage and something else, fear. Miss Hawthorne, Archer murmured beside me, Stay focused. This is just the beginning. I nodded. But as the proceedings began, my mind flickered back to 2 nights earlier. I had been sitting at Helena's kitchen table sorting old jewelry orders when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Vivian. The voice was raw. Broken. Rowan, I whispered. My heart seized. I'm at the station, he slurred. They arrested me. DUI. Silence burned between us. I remembered the boy who shared Halloween candy with me in secret because Dad said I didn't deserve sweets that year. I remembered the teenage brother who forged my signature so he could steal my college funds. Viv, he sobbed, I didn't call Dad. I didn't call Mom. I called you. Please. Helena drove me there in silence. When we entered the holding cell area, I saw him, hair-matted eyes, red-rimmed hands trembling, the golden boy crumbling. He looked up at me with shattered pride. Why, I asked. Why steal my future? His shoulders shook with silent sobs. Because you were always too bright, Viv. You walked into a room and it hurt. Because everyone saw you. Even when they ignored you, they saw. And me, I was nothing without their praise. I was afraid that if you ever truly shined, everyone would see how dim I really was. I closed my eyes. For a moment, grief sliced deeper than betrayal. The grief of knowing we had both been raised in a home where love was currency and worth was rationed. I don't hate you, I whispered, but I don't pity you either. When I left, he called after me. Viv, I'm glad you got out. The gavel pounded, jolting me back. The judge ruled in my favor a freeze on all trust accounts, mandatory financial audits, and Dean's removal from the board of directors of Lakefield Industries effective immediately. As we left the courtroom, Mom stood waiting by the exit, tears streaking her mascara. She held out a small box. Inside were dozens of letters, all in Grandma Evelyn's neat cursive. She wrote every month Mom choked out. Birthday cards, encouragement. She believed in you. I believed him when he said you were too busy to read them. I looked at her, this woman, who taught me to swallow pain with polite smiles. Her shoulders sagged under decades of silent complicity. I'm sorry, she whispered. I was a coward. No, I replied, voice trembling with both anger and finality. You were a mirror of him, but I refused to be. I walked away, letters clutched to my chest, like armor forged from every stolen word of love she tried to send me. That evening, I sat in Helena's study reading Grandma Evelyn's final letter under the glow of an old brass lamp. Her words thundered in my veins like prophecy. If he ever steals from you, fight. You are stronger than his cruelty, stronger than their silence, stronger than you know. And for the first time in 22 years, I believed it. They used to call me the daughter who vanished. The girl who disappeared at 4:11 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, leaving behind nothing but a receipt for everything they stole from her soul. The girl who walked out with nothing but a duffel bag and 22 years of silent fury pressed into her bones. The girl who was easy to erase because she had learned to erase herself first. But today, as I stand before a room full of survivors at our Second Chances workshop, I am no longer the girl who ran away under cover of dawn. I am the woman who returned not to them, but to myself. The woman forged from every bruise they thought would break her. The woman who rose from the ashes of their indifference with wings they could never clip. I look out at their faces, young women with tear-bright eyes, hope flickering beneath fear, men with clenched jaws and trembling hands carrying secrets they've never spoken aloud, teens with hunched shoulders bracing for a world that keeps trying to tell them their worth is conditional. I grip the mic tighter, feeling its cool metal anchor me to this moment. I breathe in the silence, feeling it bloom inside my chest, before I let my words slice through it like a blade honed on grief and truth. They told me disappearing was cowardice, that walking away meant giving up. But what if leaving was the bravest thing I ever did? What if vanishing was how I made myself seen? A hush falls. A collective exhale trembles through the room like wind through autumn leaves. Because they know. God, they know. They know what it feels like to sit at a dinner table where your name is never spoken with pride, only with weary obligation. They know what it feels like to be needed only for your silence, your obedience, your ability to absorb cruelty without flinching or screaming. They know what it feels like to carry a love that is nothing more than captivity with prettier chains. I pause, letting my gaze sweep across them, catching eyes that dart away and eyes that hold mine with desperate hunger. Then I speak the truth that shattered me, rebuilt me, and now pours from my chest like wildfire. I didn't disappear to punish them. I disappeared to save myself. Applause breaks out, raw, unpolished, trembling with tears unshed, but it is what happens after that will live with me forever. A girl no older than 19 comes to me, her hands trembling so hard she clenches them into fists to hide it. Do you think she whispers, her voice cracking like glass underfoot, that I could vanish too? That I could come back stronger like you? I look at her bitten nails, the purplish moons beneath sleepless eyes, the quiet war raging behind them. I see the girl I was at 19, praying for someone to tell her she was allowed to leave, allowed to live. No, I say softly, firmly, with a fierceness that makes her flinch and then stand taller. Don't vanish, transform, because they will never see it coming. That night as I leave, the city is hushed under winter fog, streetlights glowing like silent sentinels in the dark. I drive past the old Hawthorne house, but it is no longer theirs. Now it glows with warm light laughter bubbling up from within tiny faces pressed to windows covered in paper snowflakes. Evelyn House. Transitional housing for women and children. A place of safety, a place of rebirth, a testament that even places built on cruelty can become sanctuaries.